If you were with us in December, we had a conversation that we were calling Unexpected Christmas. I'm going to revisit it today for just a few minutes, and I pushed off what I wanted to start with today to next week. And if you'll bear with me, you'll find out why as we talk about this. I want to tell you a little story this morning and weave it into a conversation and let you know what God has done in my life over the holidays. And maybe you can find some relatable ground there. Back in December, we had this conversation called An Unexpected Christmas. And what we started to discover was that through the birth of Jesus, the lineage that Matthew talks about, when Matthew writes, he has like these 51 names in 16 verses. And as he puts all that in there, these names that really get kind of boring to read through, what we discover is this God is declaring not just the birth of Jesus and how it's going to happen, but he's declaring a very important truth. You see, the family line of Jesus was incredibly messed up, right? If you were here, you know this. He had people in his genealogy there was a murderer in his family line. There's adulterers in his family line. There were liars in his family line. This is the birth of the Son of God. In his family line were all of these people, including a father-in-law who, by the way, fathered two sons by his daughter-in-law, right? Like we're talking stuff that would be newsworthy even today by all standards. We're talking things that would make it to the evening news and possibly even shock us still today. And we wrapped up with King David, who himself was a great king, but had some real failures in his life, right? And so we started talking about this, and basically we came to realize this one statement that I gave you, and I put it at the top of your page. You can write it again one more time as we go into 2020. Here's the statement that your only hope, now listen, your only hope when it comes to you relating to God, when it comes to you standing before God, when it comes to you earning God's favor, your only hope has nothing to do with what you've done and everything to do with what has been done for you. And that was the whole push of the message. It's somewhat unexpected, right? It's the reason why the unreligious like Jesus. It's the reason why the failures like Jesus. It's the reason why the unworthy, the poor, all of these people flocked around him then and still today. Because it had nothing to do with them trying to earn God's favor. It had everything to do with what Jesus was doing with us. And to be honest, in our culture, what we tend to expect is this. We expect that if I do my best, then God will love me. If I do my very best, then I'll succeed in life. If I do my very best, then things will go well in life. And the unexpected piece is that God uses the absolute failures of this world in the eyes of this world to show us who he is and to redeem us, and that is the story. That's the story. That's what Christmas was all about. In the pain, in the mess, in the sin, in our failures, right? God is still working. So we can believe that this morning, that regardless of what's going on in your life, God is still working in and through you. It's not what our culture tells us. It's not, listen, I hear this even in the church today, that God's blessed me this past year. I got the promotion I wanted. I got married to the girl I wanted to marry or the guy I wanted to marry. I got the new home I wanted. I've got the money in my retirement account or my savings account that I've always wanted. I got the raise I wanted. My bank account's starting to look like I want it to look. And God's blessing me. And that doesn't mean he's not. But the message of Christmas and the unexpected piece, the element that carries over into 2020 that we should remember all year long is that God's not absent when you're suffering as well. That so many times, in fact, the hard places of life are where you discover more about who he is. You discover his character, his personality, and how much he really loves you. The Christmas story, that lineage is in place to remind me my efforts, my performance will never impact the promises of God. They're going to remain faithful. God will stay faithful, and that's the good news. That's the message we should be about all the time. That's the great news. That's the thing that caused people to flock to Jesus all the time. And I want to tell you, and I hope it doesn't shock you, is that I believe that. Like that's at the core of what I believe about who God is. It's the core of why I do what I do. It's the core of what drives me. I believe this about God. But here's the problem. Write this down. When I believe something is true, but I excuse myself from that belief, then the pain in my life will have no purpose. If I believe it, that's good. If I believe something's true, but I excuse myself from that belief, we'll talk more about that, then the pain in my life is not going to have any purpose. I was a kid. I was not very athletic. Now, I need you to probably not put this on social media, okay? I have a reputation to protect, but growing up as a kid and even into my adult years, I'm not very athletic, okay? I still claim that some of it has to be that when you're 6 foot and 100 pounds in eighth grade, that's a problem, right? I mean, if the wind can knock you over, the guys on the basketball court are going to knock you over too, right? I'm sure there's more to it. I'm sure there's a talent piece that I don't have, but that's my story. I'm going to stick with that. I think part of my problem, though, too, is I never developed a passion for any sport. I played basketball when I was little. It didn't matter. If I missed a game, it didn't matter to me. I remember thinking this way. I played baseball when I was little. You ever played outfield in elementary school? Like, you're just asking. Those are the kids that they design things in their heads. Those kids, because there's just nothing going on in second and third grade in the outfield, right? I had no passion for it. I played tennis. That's the closest I came to loving a sport, was tennis. But I didn't develop a passion for it. I played soccer, and man, that field's really large, and that was not for me. And then in junior high, a coach tried to get me into running, which I love you if you run, but I don't consider a sport. I mean, I thought running is what you did when the dinosaurs chased you, and so we don't have dinosaurs, and now we have cars, so we don't have to run. So I didn't grow up an athlete. Fast forward to 1980. This thing happened on TV. It happens every few years, the Winter Olympics, and this ragtag group of young men that nobody knew from mostly college backgrounds, because that's all they would take at that time. These college hockey players assembled and started this march towards a gold medal, and nobody gave them a chance. And somewhere along the way, the talk started, and as I was still in junior high, but I remember every night that the Americans played hockey, I was up even late to watch every game. It seems like I believe I watched every game on their way to the gold, and the whole odds were against them, and nobody thought they would do it. But for me, it was more than just watching a sport. All of a sudden, I had a passion for a sport. I'd never really experienced that level. Like, I started to be fascinated with the speed and the agility and the way they did things on the ice, and so I developed this love for hockey. But now there were two other problems in my life. One, I told you where I grew up, right? San Antonio. There was, I think, in 1980, one sheet of ice, and it was for figure skaters. And the hockey was not in existence in San Antonio, Texas, back in the 80s that I know of. And then the other piece that really was a hindrance to me is I discovered later on, they will say in Canada and probably up in the northern states that if your kid is not on the ice by the age of 2, there's not a chance they'll ever make it to the NHL. And so I was obviously in junior high, so I had already lost out there. So these things happened to me, but I developed a passion for a sport that I never saw it coming. And fast forward then again a few more years to 93. In 93, this, again, ragtag group of pretty worthless players at the time, don't tell them I said that, but it's out there on tape to see that they came, the Minnesota North Stars, to Dallas, and eventually became the Dallas Stars, and set up shop. And so for the first time, Texas had hockey, and a buddy of mine took me, and we sat up in the nosebleeds because I was still learning the game, and you could see the everything develop on the ice, and my passion was growing. 1999, April 27th is one of those times some of you mark things by sport events, right? Like when something great happens. Maybe it's not sporting events. Maybe you remember where you were when the moon landing took place. But on April 27th, 1999, the Stars were playing the Edmonton Oilers in the playoffs. That game would go down as one of the top 20 longest games in NHL playoff history. Went over 2 whole games worth. I think we got home about 3:30 in the morning. It was an amazing night, right? And I have this memory. And then a few years after that, this strange thing happened. I was in the right place at the right time, and my family, some paths crossed, and I got to spend like personal time in a small setting with Mike Modano and Marty Turco. And those names won't mean anything to most of you, but these are the greatest players from the Dallas Stars. And my son's playing basketball as a small child with Marty Turco, and my passion is growing for this sport. I just admire it, and I'm drinking it in. So in January of last year, when these tickets go on sale for this thing called the Winter Classic, it's a hockey game that happens on New Year's Day, and except it's not in a building now, where typically hockey arenas have about a 20,000 seat capacity. This game on New Year's Day happens on a football stadium, and they were going to play it in the Cotton Bowl in Texas. They were going to put ice on the field at the Cotton Bowl, and nobody actually believed they could do it or pull it off. And so those tickets go on sale, and my son and I are texting, and I jump online, and I don't know if you know this, but those tickets sold out in an hour, and I'm online, and I'm clicking seats and trying to figure out what I can really afford and what my wife will let me get away with, and I click. If you've ever bought tickets online, you click the seats you want, and I click these 3 seats, and they're pretty good seats, and they're down in the bowl, and I hit buy, and I'm into this thing, and it checks out, and I get the confirmation email. And as I'm following up, because I bought 3 seats, right? One for me, one for my wife, and one for my son. As I follow up, all of a sudden, there's only 2 seats that I bought. Somewhere between checking the seats off and paying for them and getting out of the cart and into my email confirmation box, we lost a seat in January of 2019. Fast forward a little more. On December 16th last month, my legs started to hurt. I've had back surgery before. I've had a little bit of disc trouble, and I've had one decompressed. And if you know what that is, back pain's a real weird thing. But my back started to hurt just a little bit on the 16th, and I thought, well, that's weird, because I didn't do anything to make it hurt. We've talked, my whole family's gone through. I mean, everybody knows my schedule. I didn't do anything. I didn't bend over. I didn't feel anything pull, but it just started hurting. Well, by the 18th, I was pretty much doing everything from a horizontal position. On the 22nd, I preached from a rocking chair. If you were here, it was somewhat humorous, unless you were me. It wasn't humorous for me. It was incredibly painful. So painful, the afternoon of the 22nd, I did something that if you know me, everybody knows I don't do. I went to Care Now. I mean, and so obviously I'm in pain because I have to do this thing. I went to Care Now, and they gave me a couple of prescriptions and a shot, and everybody says, oh yeah, get this one shot, and it's gonna help. And they gave me the shot, and the nurse says, oh, you feel that? And I was like, no, I don't. And so I'm asking them to look into whether or not they gave me just sugar water, but I paid for some kind of expensive shot, I'm sure. And then I basically, by the 24th, we're up here for 2 Christmas Eve services, and I'm if you didn't see me a lot, it's because I was in a little room over here by the bathroom in the little couch, just stretched out trying to get some relief. And I was on some donated medications, and I'm going to leave that at that. But my eyes were really glassy, and some of you noted that. But I think, I don't know, we haven't seen the video. I don't know what I said, but I somehow got through it. But I was in pain, and so I went home on the 24th, and the family came over, and we visited for a little bit, and I went to bed. And on December 25th, I went to stand up, and I fell, and I screamed. And I don't think I've ever felt that kind of pain. I mean, just to think about it. Because pain puts you in a weird place. So on Christmas morning, December 25th, my wife does something that I would never allow in my right mind. She calls 911. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't on my Christmas list. There are 6 EMT guys in my bedroom. And they're giving me this shot of, so if you know medicine, they call it fentanyl, and they claim it's miraculous. And I said, again, sugar water, you guys really got to do better. And they get me out to the ambulance, and then they go, okay, we got this one, and this one's going to set you free, And so they gave me ketamine, and if you know drugs, apparently all I saw were clouds. And they kept saying, but the pain's gone. And I said, no, the pain is not gone. And so for the next 4 hours, I got 4 more drugs on top of that in the ER. And it was probably about the middle of the night, Christmas night, before the pain subsided. And the MRI shows that, yeah, I've got a blown out disc, and it is what it is, right? And all of a sudden, an unexpected Christmas has happened to me. And this thing of, it's really nice when you read the Bible and you read these characters, and you get to learn from their story, or you think you're learning. You think you're learning from their stories. And Paul talks about a pain in his side, and you're going, oh, that must have been bad, Paul. And Bible stories are really good as long as they stay in the Bible, right? I mean, they're fun to read sometimes, they're crazy to read. But this time the story jumped out at me. We closed December talking about King David. If you remember, King David was the guy that's listed, that Jesus has to come from his family line. That's how we're going to know that Jesus is the Messiah, that whoever the Messiah is has to come from the family lineage of King David. And so every first century Jewish follower of God would have known this. They would have known that King David, you had to be from his family line if you were going to be the son of God. But the thing is, King David's life was as messy as anybody's in the Old Testament. He's the one who basically had his friend killed because he slept with his friend's wife, and she got pregnant, and he tried to cover it up. And the guy, to be honest, if we just knew the story today, you would say that's a wicked guy. We would wrestle with what to do with King David, because here he is, he's described later as a man after God's own heart, but he does these really wicked, selfish things. And we closed with him. And we talked about how unexpected it is that he would be in the family line, but something's going to happen next in the story and life of David, and that's what I want to pick it up with this morning. We're going to close it out and look forward to 2020 by just thinking about something that jumps out at me from the life of David. That as he's created all this mess, and he thinks he's gotten away with it, even appears that he's gotten away with it. The Bible says God knew. It looks like he got away with it, but God knew. And if you go to 2 Samuel 12, I'm going to read to you this morning from the New Living Translation, because I just like the readability of it. I want to pick it up, because God's going to send this prophet, Nathan, into his life. And he's going to send the prophet Nathan for a very specific purpose. And if you've ever gone to somebody and you need to talk to them about something really, really hard, and maybe they're going to get mad at you, and perhaps it's your boss, like they could fire you. See, that's what Nathan's looking at. Yeah, he's a prophet of God, but David's the king. And if you bring a king bad news, they tend to kill the bearer of bad news, right? Let's pick it up. Verse 1, chapter 12 of 2 Samuel. So the Lord sent Nathan the prophet to tell David this story. There were 2 men in a certain town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned a great many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but one little lamb he had bought. And he raised that little lamb, and it grew up with his children. It ate from the man's own plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. Now, before you think to yourself, that's kind of gross, I have seen most of you dog lovers do every bit of it was just written here, okay? So cut him some slack. It's a lamb, okay? And who knows, maybe this lamb didn't shed as much as your puppy does, so that would be a benefit, I would think. So he's cuddling this thing, because if you have an animal that you've grown accustomed to, that you've grown to love, that's what they want you to feel right here. God wants you to feel what it means to have a pet that you really love. Watch this, verse 4. One day a guest arrived at the home of the rich man. But instead of killing an animal from his own flock or herd, he took the poor man's lamb, killed it, and prepared it for his guest. My guess is this poor man was probably in service to the rich man. And so instead of wasting his own flock or herd, he went to the poor man and said he doesn't need that. And he took what belonged to him, what his family had come to love. He took their family pet. Verse 5. David was furious. Now I want you to underline that. And I want you to this week, I want you to keep this flyer, because if you've got the verses right there in front of you, I want you to go over this over and over and over again. David was furious. Right response. As surely as the Lord lives, he vowed, any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one he stole, and for having no pity. Notice how angry he gets. In fact, he gets so angry that his first really words out of his mouth are to issue a verdict about punishment. And do you think the punishment fits the crime? He wants to kill this guy for simply taking a lamb. The punishment doesn't fit the crime, but the justice is rising up in King David, which is what it should do, because he watches out for the kingdom, right? He protects the people. He's about the flourishing of the people of God and this land, and so he should get angry. The thing is, he gets angry in a way that doesn't match the crime. And you start to think to yourself, I wonder if David's feeling a little guilty here. But it's not settling in just yet. Remember what I said to you a while ago? Look back at your page. When I believe something is true but excuse myself from that belief, then the pain in my life will have no purpose. David believes the rich man is wrong. And he's excused himself from that same principle. And God has sent Nathan just out of his grace because he wants to get David's attention, because what's coming up in David's life, David needs to pay attention to. David needs to learn from what God's about to do with him. But he's not paying attention right now. So he sends Nathan with this story. I hope you have somebody in your life that tells you stories. I hope you have somebody in your life that tells you stories that are hard to hear and make you think. David can spot the truth in everybody else's life, but he's not seeing it in his. Watch this though, verse 7. Nathan gets real bold by the presence of God, and he says this to David, you are that man. You're that man. The Lord, the God of Israel, says, I anointed you king of Israel and saved you from the power of Saul. Now watch this. A lot of people will struggle with these next few verses, and you'll see the implication of why they struggle with it. Look, verse 8, he says, I gave you, this is God speaking, I gave you your master's house and his wives and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. Why then have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed? We struggle with that because there's a sense that it almost feels like God is saying, look, I gave you in something that we know God's not in favor of. He gives him this plurality of wives. And you have to, again, understand the culture. God always enters a culture where it's at and brings us along. That's his grace. But in that culture, if a king went into an area with his armies and they took an area over, and all of the king's wives, do you know what would happen with them if they weren't taken in and taken care of? They would be tossed to the curb. They would be tossed out on the street. Women were property at this period in time in history. And so there's a sense that there's a bit of protection that God's providing, but we often read this and we go, aha, see, God's inconsistent with his word. He allowed David to have multiple wives. That's not the point of the story. But God does remind him of it. He goes, look, you already had a lot of wives. And you know what? If you just asked, maybe I'd have given you some more. I don't know. But what did you do? You, the leader of the land, you broke my commands. You misled your own people. Why then, verse 9, have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed? For you have murdered Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the Ammonites and stolen his wife. Please don't read that as you murdered Uriah and stole his wife, and stealing his wife was less important. I read that this week and I thought to myself, why didn't he talk about stealing the wife first? And I'm pretty convinced he's just listing it. He's just throwing it out there. There's no rhyme or reason. He just says, you murdered a guy and you stole his wife. And you did this in front of everybody and you thought you got away with it. Verse 10, from this time on, your family will live by the sword because you have despised me by taking Uriah's wife to be your own. And for the rest of David's life, it would be a life of turmoil. His family would have fights. There was all kinds of turmoil. His throne would have problems. But something happened to David in this process, and I'd love for you this week, write out in your margins, just write Psalm 51. Go read through Psalm 51 this week, because you just get a really good sense of what happens in David's heart, and what should happen in our hearts is David comes back around, and he repents, and he recognizes what he's done wrong. But see, God had already promised to be faithful to David way back in December when we were looking at all of this. And so now he's going to keep his promises, even though David is so far off. Listen, today, if the media got a hold of this, we would be shaking our hands and shaking our fists, and we'd be saying, man, David, I'm not even sure David's a Christian. And God says, look, no, I'm going to keep my promises with you. And by the way, followers of God mess up still. But David messed up. He was in rebellion against God, but God stays faithful. And here's what's going to happen, and we're going to shorten it now because we don't have time. But David will come to repentance, recognize his wrong, proclaim it, and then he will begin to write about God. And I want you to understand what we just said, that what's going to happen now going forward is David's family is really going to fall apart. There's going to be all these problems. There's going to be a lot of pain in his world. So the pain increases in his life. But in 2 Samuel 22, I want to read you part of what's become known as a song of praise, where David is writing. In the middle of all that pain, David starts to write how he thinks about God. Look at verse 29 of 22. O Lord, you are my lamp. The Lord lights up my darkness. He's in trauma. He's in pain. His family's falling apart. But he doesn't blame God. And he sees God for who he is. Oh Lord, you're my lamp. The Lord lights up my darkness. In your strength, when I walk in your strength, I can crush an army. With my God, I can scale any wall. God's way is perfect. All the Lord's promises prove true. He's a shield for all who look to him for protection. David began to fully understand, fully embrace the role of pain in his life. He began to fully understand, listen, it's not about explaining the pain. Oh, David, you sinned so greatly, so now I'm going to make your life painful for the rest of your life. David began to really embrace and understand that in that pain, God was offering him a favor. That in that pain, in his mess, it kept him humble. It kept him always looking for God in the middle of his pain. We keep saying this. Becoming a Christian does not make your life all right. Following Jesus is not going to make your life better, necessarily according to the standards of this world. What will happen is following Jesus allows you to know God in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of the pain. And if that wasn't true, I wouldn't be here. If that wasn't, because I've been in ministry for a lot of years, and I've been in a lot of churches, and I got to be real honest, this is about the messiest place we could work, right? I mean, vocationally, churches are kind of messy. I don't know if you've noticed that, if you've been to one or two in your lifetime. And the thing that David brings out for us in this story, the thing that he models, is that in the middle of the mess, in the middle of the chaos, you actually can know the peace of God. You can walk with God. You can know his presence with you. And that's what the story's about. How does this apply to my back? Some of you probably think that I would draw a correlation in this story to December 25th when I'm in the hospital. And the amazing thing is, I think back on the first 5 or 6 hours in the hospital, I have no time recollection. Like I told my wife, I thought that was about 30 minutes because I had just shut my eyes and the pain was so intense, I just kind of came out on the other side. So I have nothing to measure it by. So I would imagine some of you would think, well, yeah, you draw some parallels between that and what David went through. But my parallels come on New Year's Day. Because on New Year's Day, I'm laying in bed and my wife took my ticket. And my wife went to the Winter Classic, and God love her. I mean, she already knew that it was a done deal. My son and I were going to the game because it was hockey, right? And she had been a really good sport about it, and I had to promise her over and over that I didn't cut off her ticket on purpose. And but she had already said too she was going to go shopping on New Year's Day, so I figured we were all going to come out even, or she might actually come out ahead. But on New Year's Day, I'm laying there, and it starts to fall into place. That a year ago, I tried to buy those tickets. And a year ago, he took my number from 3 to 2. A year ago, he knew what was coming. A year ago, he was already trying to get my attention. Because I didn't have a blown out disc just because of genetics, just because my body is wearing out. I'm not 18 anymore. Not just because it's kind of what happens to you if you're over 6 foot over time. It's not just because of that. It's because I push myself. And there's a part of my personality that's having to learn what that looks like. And please don't judge me too harshly, right? Because how many of you raise your hands don't if you've gone to work sick, right? And you just try not to tell anybody, or you muscle through the day, right? And you do it because in our culture, we just think that's what we have to do. And sometimes we do have to do that. There are people who have to go to work because they don't get a salary, or because they work hourly, and they can't afford to take those times off. And so we push ourselves. But see, I could look at that game as just coincidence, like, oh my goodness, it was just coincidence. We went from 3 tickets to 2 a year before, and I'm in the bed. Or I could look at it and I could discover God in there. And so on New Year's Day, I'm watching and I'm texting with my family, and we're back and forth. But I'm laying there thinking how sovereign my God is, that He did this thing, that He's getting my attention, right? And so now I have to not excuse myself from the things I say I believe, right? Because sometimes it's easy to preach something at you. I try very hard not to do that, but just sometimes it really is. Let's be honest. I've got the microphone, you don't. And so it's easy for me to just throw things at you and think, well, you need to do this. And this Christmas, in an unexpected way, God said, no. I need you to do this too. Write this down, because here's what I believe happens. I must continually recognize my sinful patterns. I need to continually recognize my sinful patterns, that helpless state that I have before a holy God, in order to experience the still presence of God in trying times. So many times we want to know the presence of God, but we're not willing to walk with Him in those horrible times. We just get mad at Him. And New Year's Day, I could have gotten mad, and I tried, and I probably did for a few minutes, and then the Stars started winning, and that was all good. But I in my mad, right, in my mental state of being mad, I just hear God saying to me, I'm still here. You want to talk? I'm still with you. Life's not really that bad. You missed a hockey game. In the middle of blinding pain, I start to know the presence of God. And by the way, if you've never been in that circumstance before, can I tell you something? If you've never had something that unexpected, good. I'm happy for you. It's coming. Right? Because everybody experiences something at some point in your life where you think, I have no control. And when they're driving me away in an ambulance, which, by the way, if you've never been wheeled out of your house on a stretcher, it is very surreal. And you know, all the neighbors are like through the blinds like this, and the text chains up and down the street are going on. And what did he do, man? I told you that guy overdosed on something. And it's just going through my head. And it's because I worry about what you think, and I shouldn't. But it's in the middle of that pain, when you're totally unable to control your fate, is when you discover what you really believe about who God is. C.S. Lewis will say it this way. I've quoted this before because I love this as one of his best quotes. I think pain insists upon being attended to. That's why it exists. God whispers to us in our pleasures. See, we love to think we can hear Him when things are good. He speaks to us in our consciences, but He shouts in our pains. It's His megaphone to rouse a deaf world. I would rewrite it. I'd say it's His megaphone to rouse deaf pastors. Because I think sometimes we all need that, including me. We all need it. So 2020 is in front of you. It's in front of me. And here's the question. It really is not how much pain am I going to be in this year. I told somebody this morning, I said, Paul had his thorn in the side. I don't know if his was literal or not. Mine's literal. Okay. So I figure I gather something from that. But here's the thing. 2020 is in front of us. And the question is, are you willing to consider? Are you willing to consider your sinful patterns? Because that's where God speaks to you. We've seen it in the story of Christmas. Sin is not going to keep him from fulfilling his promises to you. It simply is not. That's the great news. That should excite all of us. Sin will keep you from walking with him and from experiencing his presence. And he'll do what he has to do to put you flat on your back to get you to pay attention to this. Trust me, I've been there. So, do you believe? Do you believe God loves you in spite of your ability to perform for him? Do you believe you can't be good enough for God and that he still loves you? Do you believe that you can't be too bad for God, that he'll still fulfill his promises? Are you willing in the new year to take some time and to consider your sinful patterns, to sit, recognize, and lay it before him? Because if you're willing to go there, you're going to find that he's willing to go anywhere with you. And he's usually there. We just ignore him. But I'm just telling you, if you really want to know him, then sit with him like this. Tim Keller writes about this process in this way. He said, there's nothing more important than maintaining your inward spiritual life. A broken body can be sustained with difficulty by a strong spirit. But a broken spirit cannot be sustained by even the physically strongest person in the world. Pain will either break you and bring you to God, or it'll break you and break your spirit and make you think God is against you. Are you willing this year to sit in your sinful pattern? I'm not telling you 24/7. I'm not saying every day of the week. I'm just saying, are you willing to start the year? Are you willing to, over the course of the year, to sit long enough and to reflect and to sit with those sinful patterns and to release them to God in order to experience more of his presence in a chaotic world? Let me pray for us.